Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Landon.
And I almost have to pinch myself with the excitement of the guest that we have on today. I mean, you can't not recognize him. We have the amazing Dan McClellan on. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you. How are y'all?
Oh, we are good. You have been our dream guest, bucket list item for quite a while since we first started Mormonish, hasn't he, Landon?
Yes, yep. We've been excited for this. I know we've been trying to put this together for a while.
It's true. It's true. Everyone's busy.
Yep.
Which is great. So why don't we let Dan introduce himself? For those of you, I mean, come on, there's nobody that doesn't know who Dan is, but just very quickly. And then we have some exciting news about something new that's coming out from Dan that we want to talk about really quick at the top of the show.
Yeah. So thank you so much. I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and I am on social media primarily to try to increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion, and also combat the spread of misinformation about the same. So I spend most of my day responding to videos and other social media posts talking about the Bible and religion and its role in society today, and correcting an awful lot of misinformation, and then just sharing what's going on in the world of biblical scholarship, because it is a bit of an ivory tower and not a lot of people know what's going on over there. And so I try to act as a bit of a go-between to let people know, hey, new papers just out doing this, new books out doing this, somebody discovered an artifact over here, a temple over here, this is all cool stuff. Yeah, that's what I do as a full-time job now, in addition to my own podcast called the Data Over Dogma Podcast, which does the same stuff.
Yeah. And it is, we've met you, I think, at both Sunstones and been to several of your lectures. And just what you said reminded me when you said before, everybody out in the world is like 20 years behind as far as what's cutting edge biblical scholarship. So that's where you hear these, did you hear this rumor, this thing? And you're there to say, okay, let's slow down. No, that was actually debunked or explained years ago. And you do it in such an accessible way that I feel, anyone can understand. And you really do a great job of just kind of clearing the field of all that misinformation so people can focus on real information, which is really important, and we can learn from it. So I love that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, even when new stuff is coming out, it frequently gets misrepresented in I don't know if that's a word, but pop media.
Yeah.
Like on social media particularly. So like a study was recently published about someone who said, hey, I think I may have identified the camp where Sennacherib was holed up while he was laying siege to Jerusalem. And it gets reported in the Daily Mail and on social media as archaeologists confirm the biblical story of an angel killing 185,000 Assyrian troops. I was like, no, that has absolutely nothing. So even when it is breaking news, it does get misrepresented quite significantly when it gets to social media. So
breaking news that's thousands of years old, right? Angel kills troops, but it still plays today, right? It still has that appeal.
Yeah. This is really a hard place that you're at, because there are so many agendas when you come to Bible scholarship. And how do you know or weed out, okay, that one's valid and this is just somebody trying to push their agenda or trying to build faith without really any evidence?
Most of the folks who are out there trying to be faith promoting in a way that's not very self-critical, they kind of wear that on their sleeves, so it's not very difficult to identify those. But I'm also not trying to suggest that everybody has to follow the path of critical scholarship. But I do want to make sure that if folks are out there promulgating claims or data about the Bible and religion, that they are getting it right or doing it responsibly. And so there are times when I will respond to folks who I would identify socially as like-minded, when, frequently I'll say something like, I can appreciate and respect this person's rhetorical goals, what they're trying to do here, but what they're sharing is misinformation. And so I try not to focus on who's doing it. I try to focus on what's being said. And that means that I'm going to be correcting and criticizing people from the entire spectrum of belief and non-belief, whether I might agree with them or be friends with them outside of social media, or I might definitely not be. So I try to treat everybody as equal as I can in that regard. And I think I have an okay degree of success there, although, of course, I'm not perfect.
No, I think that's why you have such credibility. People understand that about you. You do not have an agenda, and you are simply about the information and making sure accurate information is out there. So I think that's why that's important. So
Yeah.
Landon, let's pull up the slide really quick, because for those of you that can't get enough Dan McClellan on Dead Over Dogma or any of that, tell us what this is all about. This is so exciting. When I saw this post, I'm like, yes.
This book is coming out toward the end of April in 2025. It's called The Bible Says So, What We Get Right and Wrong About Scripture's Most Controversial Issues. And it goes through 18 different claims about something that the Bible says from all different perspectives. And I go through and try as best I can to share what the critical scholarship suggests the data indicate, whether I say it does say this, or it doesn't say this, or parts do and parts say something differently, or we can't really tell for sure. And so I just go through to try to clarify for the public whether or not the Bible actually says so when it comes to a lot of these controversial issues.
Can you give us an example of some of these 18 things?
Yeah. So
no spoilers, right? But maybe something. a little something.
Teaser.
So
teaser.
The first couple of chapters talk about one chapter is called "The Bible Says the Bible is Inspired." So I go through and talk about whether or not the Bible says the Bible is inspired. There's one chapter that says the Bible says homosexuality is an abomination. So I talk about whether or not it says that. The Bible says you should beat your kids. And so I talk about whether or not it says that. The Bible says Jesus is God. I talk about whether or not the Bible actually says that. So there are 18 of them. And then there's an introductory chapter that's all about a kind of a broad level view of how scholars think the Bible came together. So it should be pretty educational for folks who hear an awful lot people yapping about the Bible says this, the Bible says that.
I was going to say that's a mic drop for a lot of people, right? You can't argue back when somebody says, well, because the Bible says so. I mean, and that's the mic has been dropped. You cannot move on. I feel like this may be a series, because I feel like 18 is just starting. I feel like
there were a bunch. I was like, oh, I wish I had space to fit these in. And so part of me is like wanting to do a volume 2. Yeah. But I'll have to talk with the publisher about that.
Yeah. I feel like there'll be demand. So, and we'll definitely put links in the show notes to this. And I've seen so many positive responses just on the social media posts that you've done already, that everybody is really, really excited. So we're just,
now that you've been on Mormonish, this, you're going to be number one on the New York bestseller.
No, this will launch it. This will do it. Yeah. Oh yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Landon. So, all right, you can take the slide down. So, and Dan was showing us that he does have a copy of the book, sort of.
I have a mock-up of the book.
It's a mock-up.
So it's
which is great. I know, because
taped onto the cover, taped to another book. Yeah,
because we love to hold up books. We're all about that with our The Good Book Club, and we love to, and I was like, Landon, do we have a book to hold up? But I even thought of like making my own mock-up, just like that. I was like, Landon, do you have a color printer? Could we maybe, and then I just kind of ran out of time. But I thought it's okay. The book's not even out yet, so it's fine. So
yeah.
All right. So anyway, everybody look in the show notes for that, and everybody pre-order. This is coming out in April, and it's going to be amazing. So now we'll get into why we invited Dan on. So, which we've been trying to do, as Landon alluded to, for a while. Anytime you have a biblical question, you're like, who could we have on? Why Dan, right? There's so many things that we could talk about. But what has been on our mind recently, and I'll tell you why. In the Good Book Club last month, we read the book, if anyone has it, hold it up, Armageddon by Bart Ehrman. That's right. And he talks about the book of Revelations and the concept of Armageddon. And it was a very timely book, I felt, to read, because I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if it's, the political climate or what it is, but I seem to hear a lot about the end of the world, things like that in General Conference, which was just last month. To me, it seemed like I heard several mentions of, second coming is near, prepare, get ready. I even heard the idea of we're building so many temples because that's what's necessary for the second coming, which is near. Although we did hear Elder Stevenson say that it wouldn't be till after 2034 when the Olympics come. So we can rest assured it's not going to be for 10 years. But I just feel like, and have you noticed this, Landon? Just seems like an amped up the volume of people talking about, I mean, volume noise and volume, the amount of people talking about this end of days again and referring to the book of Revelations.
It has been. And, you know, of course, one question that comes up is that because people are leaving the church, and so you throw in he's coming, don't leave quite yet. It's almost the end. You don't want to go out at the end, what is it that they're seeing that is convincing them that the end of the world is coming? And so when we read Armageddon and Bart Ehrman's book, he made a very strong case, I thought, and Bart Ehrman is one of the best Bible scholars I think out there, that the book of Revelations doesn't talk about our day. It's talking about the time of the Romans, right after the destruction of Jerusalem, in that time period, maybe 100 AD or so. And that's when they were saying the exact same thing. He's coming back, and he's coming back soon. So we thought, well, let's have Dan come on and talk about that with us.
That's right. And I think I'd start out maybe by asking the questions, because we do want to focus, of course, on the book of Revelations. What is the appeal? Everybody seems to just love to read this. They love to get all, the shivers and reading what's there. What is the appeal to this book? It's just everybody uses it.
Well, I think a lot of people, it's not so much that they're excited about the end of the world, but they're excited about something to happen that's in the Bible, because it would be a confirmation of everything that people have spent the last 2,000 years hoping for and yearning for and looking forward to. Some kind of actual confirmation that this is all going to happen. And so when they see things out of the ordinary to them, just intuitively, they're like, oh, could this be it? Is this the start of suddenly the heavens opening and all of this being confirmed? And because since the 19th century, we have so much pushback against kind of the idea of revealed religion, that there's an awful lot of anxiety associated with the notion that none of this is true, that this is all made up. And so having some kind of actual confirmation that this is all real, I think, is something that a lot of people spend their entire lives seeking and waiting for and hoping for. And the Armageddon, the end of the world, could not be a clearer example of that, of confirmation that this is all real and this is all going to happen, and they're going to get to be a part of it in some way. So I don't think it has so much to do with, yay, the world's going to end, but yay, we're actually going to witness something that proves our worldview and our faith was valid all along. And I think a lot of people would really love to see that, and are not so much concerned for the widespread death and destruction. That's probably not at the that's not what they're concerned about. But that also serves the identity politics at the same time, because the book of Revelation is so much about us versus them, and we are the good guys, they are the bad guys, they are Satan and his minions and his armies and his angels and all that. And for a lot of conservative Christians, particularly Christian nationalists, they're trying to draw increasingly sharp lines between them and everyone else, and trying to paint everyone else as supremely evil and supremely wicked. And so it just kind of fits into what they're hoping and waiting for. And it would just be a confirmation that they were right all along, not just about the religious side of things, but also the identity politics side of things. And I think that's probably a little more fundamental on an intuitive level, at least. I think that's probably motivating the majority of the hope and the desire and the yearning for all of this to come to pass, to validate their identity and validate their commitment to that identity, and everything that they may have sacrificed for it, everything they may have given up, everything they may have suffered for it. And so I think there's some conscious stuff, there's some unconscious stuff going on as well. But yeah, that doesn't make it any less harmful for people to be promoting this idea that we should be excited about mass death and destruction, and that we should take no care for what's going to happen tomorrow, or for the poor and the orphan and the widow and the needy and the environment and everything else that is just being ignored because people are too excited about the end of the world.
You said something there that was you said really the 19th century is kind of when this that people started to want that again. Bart Ehrman brought that up in his book, that it kind of had gone out of style after, nothing happened after the first century.
Right. The end of the world had gone out
and that
of
it
style.
really didn't come back until, the mid 1800s is when this Armageddon and the rapture itself is really an evangelical term. I know as Mormons, I don't know what your take is from a Mormon standpoint, but rapture isn't something we really talk about, although it's kind of described, that we'll get him caught up and meet him, but we don't call it the rapture. Can you address that at all? Or
yeah, the idea of the rapture comes out of some apocalyptic interpretive triangulations that were taking place in the early 19th century. A man named Darby from Ireland, I believe, was the creator of the concept of the rapture as we understand it today, which took place between around 1827 and 1833. So same time period as Joseph Smith, but that kind of took off in the U.S. and a little bit in Great Britain and spread like wildfire during the Second Great Awakening. But outside of the U.S., everybody kind of was like, this isn't for us. And so most of the rest of the Christian world has just dismissed the idea of the rapture, except for mainly American evangelicals, some on the British side as well. But it's really a framework that was invented from taking part of Matthew and a part of Thessalonians and a part of Daniel and just trying to say, okay, this all means this is how the end times are going to be kicked off, with this suddenly everybody getting yanked up into the sky. And that's based on a fundamental misunderstanding of this passage in Thessalonians about being caught up into the air to meet the Lord coming in the clouds of glory. And the idea is, this is using imagery that would have been well known to Paul's audience, that when a city is receiving a conquering king or a returning sovereign or something, everybody files out of the city to go receive the person out on the way and then to usher them back into the city. So Jesus's triumphal entry is in some ways a reflection of that kind of imagery, that convention. And what Paul's doing is reorienting it vertically and saying, we're going to be caught up so that we can go meet Jesus and then flip a Yui, and we're all going to come back down to earth with Jesus. And then Jesus will take up his rule on earth, his kingdom on earth. And so while the rapture idea misunderstands this to be everybody's going to shoot up into the sky and just keep on going to heaven, and that misunderstands that imagery pretty significantly. But because it has become such a useful rhetorical tool, and particularly because it strikes fear in the hearts of particularly younger people, but also some older people, that, I have to eat my vegetables and I have to make sure not to touch myself. And I have to make sure to not look at naughty pictures or whatever. Otherwise, I'm going to wake up one day and my whole family's going to be gone because they've all been raptured and I've been left behind. And that's, there are generations of children who were traumatized by the notion that they were going to be left behind. And that is an effective rhetorical whip to crack over the heads of kids who are not doing what you want them to do. And unfortunately, that has caused untold trauma and anxiety and depression and self-harm and things like that for kids who are raised with that. So that, I think that's one of the reasons it is still salient within American evangelicalism, because that's an identity that tends to lean into some of the more extreme high demand features of Christianity. And I don't think Latter-day Saints are immune from that. There is an awful lot of overlap, particularly in the second half of the 20th century, between the Latter-day Saint world and the world of conservative Christian evangelicals, Christian nationalists. We've got our own little DesNet crew that does a lot of the same stuff. So
yes, we do. No, I started looking into the rapture a little bit. I had a high school friend that very much, she was evangelical, and I didn't realize until I connected with her that, they really do believe that this is going to happen. They'll be taken up to the point where some people have little trap doors in their ceiling so that you can make it out, right? And
everybody else is just going to be stuck against the ceiling,
like floating it like a balloon. Yeah, exactly. And I even came across a company where worried about the pets, right? And this is why I don't believe in the rapture, because what loving God would leave a pet alone? People, whatever, but pets, I draw the line there. But this company said, if you're worried about your pet during the rapture, we have a system where friendly atheists will be alerted and come to your house and take your pet. And you sign up, you pay for this service. This was real. It's a website, and they send you emails to make sure you're still there. The day they don't get a response, they assume you've been raptured, and a friendly atheist will show up. I thought, what a great business model, right? You're never going to have to deliver, but I love that. Friendly atheists will take your pets. So, but I did think about this idea of the rapture in the context of Mormonism. And I thought also that's a fear for Mormon children, that you may not be with your family forever. And you're right. It's sort of a high demand, high control device, for those that take it seriously, to realize that my family is conditional on, like you said, listed those behaviors that really don't mean anything, but in the religious context, they do. And so it's very similar. So for anyone who's LDS that kind of makes fun of the rapture, there are a lot of similarities. We have the same kind of context for that. And you're right, as we learned in Bart Ehrman's book, it's kind of all put together from different pieces, but it's very real for a certain group. So very interesting.
So Dan, who wrote Revelations?
That was my next question.
I've heard John the Revelator. I always thought that was John of Peter, James, and John. But according to Bart Ehrman, it's a guy named John who was on the Isle of Patmos. We really don't know who he was.
Yeah, the text starts out that this is John who's on the island of Patmos for the testimony of Jesus, and we have no reason to think it's anyone other than some dude named John. But until around 150 CE, middle of the 2nd century CE, nobody identified that John with the author of the Gospel of John. And one of the biggest reasons is that the Greek of Revelation is pretty awkward and stilted. It's not polished, sophisticated Greek. And the author of the Gospel of John was much more adept with their Greek. And it was, I think, Justin Martyr who was the first to say, I wonder if they're the same John. And that kind of became popular. But for several centuries, we have authors saying, a lot of Christians think it would be ridiculous that the guy who wrote the Gospel of John also wrote this text because of how goofy it is. And the symbolism, it's grotesque. It's not the loving God of the Gospel of John. Mm-hmm. And so while that view became the predominant view, there were always people who were like, what are you, nuts? Of course, that's not the author of the Gospel of John. But it became the predominant view just because we tend to like to see patterns. And as humans, we tend to connect dots where we can and even where we shouldn't. And if we got two Johns, they're going to be the same John at some point. And so it just kind of, the gravitational pull of having the same name ended up with people saying, oh, they're the same John. But yeah, just some dude named John.
He seemed to be known by the church because he writes, you know me, and that, like, people knew who he was. Right. But we really don't know what church he belonged to, right? Because there were multiple Christianities, and he was very specific that unless you believe exactly like I do, you're not. And even those who believe in Christ are going to get stuck in this Armageddon thing. Only the ones who believe exactly like our group are going to be saved.
Yeah. He seems to be criticizing a lot of the churches that he's writing to, praises them a little bit, and then says what they're doing wrong. And draws a pretty hard line between adequate Christianity and inadequate Christianity. We shouldn't call it Christianity yet. but followers of Jesus who are doing it right and followers of Jesus who aren't. And there are some folks who argue that that the author might be criticizing followers of Paul, because I don't remember if Bart discusses it in his book, but there are a couple other books that talk about this theory that one of the things in the letters that they talk about is they're giving a hard time to followers of Balaam and Jezebel. And they're talking about people who eat food sacrificed to idols and people who engage in sexual immorality. And there's an argument to make that this might be criticizing Paul, because Paul was saying, it doesn't matter if food's been sacrificed to idols. If you have weak brethren around who aren't going to get it, go ahead and abstain. But, that an idol is nothing in the world. It doesn't mean anything. So Paul is kind of saying, we don't care if you eat food sacrificed to idols. And then when it comes to being married to unbelievers, Paul is like, hey, you might convert your spouse, so no big deal. And a believer being married to an unbeliever was dismissed as adultery and as sexual immorality by other early Christians. And so when the author of the book of Revelation says this group is promoting idolatry and sexual immorality, maybe they're talking about followers of Paul. And, it's not the consensus view, but it is a very common theory out there that that this author is wagging the finger at followers of Paul. And how ironic that within a few centuries, the two of them would not only be part of the same corpus, but everybody would kind of just force them to agree in their interpretations of what's going on.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, because I love it when people say, oh, the Christians, right? Well, what are you talking about? There's no the Christians for centuries. I mean, Landon and I were always fascinated by, how do you pronounce it again, Landon? The Carpocratians. Maybe I'm saying it wrong. It's the little sect that think they have to experience every worldly pleasure or debaucherous, act. And that's the only way that you get, to the paradise, and you have to go back and be reincarnated and try again. So we thought, well, now how come that didn't kind of rise to the top? That
it seems like that would be their recruitment program would have a much higher success rate.
I think so too. We thought about Bishop's interviews, have you not drunken wine today? You go back in there, but there were just so many points of view. And you're right. When you talk about, Paul, was this a censure of him? Nobody who's not familiar or has listened to you or your works is going to understand that, and the thing that always gets me, and Landon, we talk about this all the time, is just this idea that it's written for our day. And they've said this forever, written for our day. And like you mentioned before, just finding the signs, looking at the symbols, being able to work it into the framework of your life in your modern day. When they showed the opening of the Olympics, the opening ceremonies, there were several TikToks and videos that popped up that said, oh my God, it's the horsemen. It's there was all kinds of imagery they saw. And everyone's like, no, that's just a representation of the police force. And they're riding, it had nothing to do with it, but in their minds, it was confirming everything that they needed to put together, like you described so well, to confirm, what they know is going to happen. So just this idea of imagery and looking for it. And there's so much in the book of Revelations. There is, what could you say about that? You can't even, the podcast will go on for hours if you talked about all the imagery. What are some of the more popular ones that people look at and go, oh, I've seen that, I know that.
Yeah. The one that was repeated, it was last year, like they stopped doing it, but last year, the Euphrates, the water level was getting really low. And there were a bunch of reasons for that. Climate change. They've got a bunch of dams further upstream where they're manipulating the flow of water in other countries and all this kind of stuff. But they're like, oh, this is from Revelation, because there's a part in Revelation 9, there's a part in Revelation 16. And they're like, as soon as the Euphrates dries up, then the 4 angels that are bound under the Euphrates River are going to be freed, and they're going to go kill 1/3 of humanity. And then there was some audio that was played that was supposed to be, and it was overlaid on video of like what looked kind of like an amateur excavation. And it was just like groaning and chains and stuff. And people were like, these are the angels. And video, there were hundreds and hundreds of videos sharing this, getting millions and millions of views. And was just all pure and utter nonsense. Like, you could track down that video. It actually came from, I want to say 2016 or 2017 or something like that. It was originally supposed to be the grave of a Pakistani cleric that was assassinated, and it was supposed to be him suffering in his grave. But it got repurposed for revelation purposes. Yeah. And then now the water levels have kind of steadied. And so people are like, all right, we'll move on to the next thing. And so then we've got, the CERN. We get a lot of CERN crap about how somebody made this thing up where they were like, Antipas in Revelation 2 is when they're writing to the church at Pergamum, says, my faithful witness, and I know where you were killed, and it was where the Satan's throne is. And people are like, and historically Antipas was known to have been killed by a bronze bull in Geneva, Switzerland. And it's like, well, no, read the verse before where it says, to the church which is in Pergamum, I know where you are located, where Antipas was slain. And that's, a city in Western Turkey. But some doofus just made up that this happened in Geneva, Switzerland, and edited Wikipedia so that it would say that.
Oh.
And it was only up on Wikipedia for a couple of weeks before somebody pointed it out and it got taken down. But thousands and thousands of people all over social media saw that, and there are still people to this day saying that Satan's throne is in Geneva, Switzerland, and it's underground where CERN is, and CERN is trying to use their particle accelerators to open a portal to hell. And then there was, what did we have? The eclipse that was supposed to pass over.
Yes.
A bunch of cities named. Oh, I don't even remember what the cities were supposed to be named. But
it was a pattern. They all fit.
Yeah. They were like, there's 7 cities. Yeah. This and it's just ridiculous because there are people who've made careers out of this.
Yes.
Who have been wrong every single time. Have been doing it for years. And it's like, you were wrong 100 times before. You're wrong now. You're going to be wrong every single time you do this in the future. And you don't find anything suspicious about that.
You got to have hope. You've got to have hope for the end of the world. I have to say, in the Mormon realm, the falling of the trumpet off the angel Moroni during the earthquake was a huge one. My parents bought into that back when that
really?
Happened. Yes, that was, the beginning of, I think, unlocking the 7th seal, and I admit that was unfortunate because it does talk about a trumpet falling and there, and then there's something about, missionaries being called back. You can find anything wherever you want to find it. And I'm talking intelligent people like my parents look at these things and they're attracted to it in some way. Maybe it's the idea of special knowledge that others don't have, or special knowledge that a select group has, but they really do look at it. And these are intelligent people. A lot of intelligent people believe in this apocalyptic mindset. So
I think it's ironic that you said they repurposed the story for this, because really Revelations has been repurposed from a destruction in 100 AD to the end of the world, apocalypse of 2020, whatever.
Well, and that's a good question. Maybe that should be our next question: is what really is the book of Revelations? Whose day was it written for? Who is it meant for? If it's not for us and everybody in between who's repurposed it for themselves, I think that's important.
Well, and this is such an important part of understanding how prophetic and particularly apocalyptic literature becomes popular. Because a text isn't going to be popular. If I write a text that says, hey, man, that says, in 2,000 years, all of this is going to go down. Yeah. And the people are going to be like, why? The game is on. I don't care about this. It only becomes popular because it's about the author's own day. And the book of Daniel is a very good example of this, because the book of Daniel is dated to the exile. This is supposed to be in the 6th century BCE during the Babylonian exile. It's actually from the middle of the 2nd century BCE. And in the text, it's like all of this is written and sealed up. And now it's actually being compiled, and a lot of it is being written around like 167 BCE. And that's when it's being published. That's when it's being circulated. And so it's made to sound like, hey, this is found footage. This was sealed up, and now we have it. And so it's about our day. So these texts are only popular to the degree they inform people's experiences in their own lifetimes, not in lifetimes that they will never see. And so when we look at the book of Revelation, this is written at the end of the 1st century CE. The imagery is most significant, most meaningful to followers of Jesus within the Roman Empire at the end of the 1st century CE. And we see with like the mark of the beast and the number of the beast that this is almost certainly encoding references to the Roman Empire, its economic system, its what were considered kind of counterfeit worship practices, and the emperors whose image and name were on the coins that would be exchanged with the right hand, and all this kind of stuff. And so it would be meaningful to an audience in the late 1st century CE. They would be able to draw a lot of these connections much more easily than an American in the 21st century CE. But because it is encoding, and because it is vague and ambiguous, it is also interpretively flexible, which means it is mobile. It can diachronically, it can move through time, and it can be interpreted to line up with almost any time period. And so it becomes something that is applicable to a wide variety of circumstances for a wide variety of people. But when you actually line it all up and look at the symbolism and try to understand how would this symbolism make sense in the 1st century CE, that is the context for all of it. That is definitely what it was all written to reflect. And so it's not a prophecy about the future. It is an attempt at prophesying about the immediate future in the late 1st century CE in order to exhort followers of Jesus to greater faithfulness to their own community, and then to keep themselves unspotted from the evil empire. And so that's all it's written for. And, you have very similar things going on with other apocalyptic literature. Again, going back to the book of Daniel, when you look at this stuff, including there will be a week and then 69 weeks and all this kind of stuff. If you line that all up with Jeremiah and with the exile, you get to the person who's killed is Onias III, a high priest, by the Seleucids. And then you get to Antiochus IV Epiphanes, the Seleucid emperor who's trying to stamp out Judaism according to the books of Maccabees. And that's where Daniel stops being historically accurate. It's like somewhat accurate. It gets increasingly accurate and increasingly detailed right when you get up to Antiochus IV Epiphanes. And then everything after that is entirely inaccurate, because that's when God's supposed to show up, and that's the climax, and that's when everything happens, the end of the world happens. And so you can tell that it was written right before that, because the author is expecting, who knows if this is a speech act in writing this, I'm going to make all this come to pass, or I'm just writing down what I hope is going to happen, or I had a weird dream because some bad fish, and so I'm writing down what I think is going to happen. But it's all in the immediate future of the author and the audience. And Revelation was the same. Unfortunately, we had someone like Athanasius of Alexandria who decided it was useful for his own structuring of power, and it made its way into the canon. And now we have to deal with it 2,000 years later.
Yeah, and it well into the future. I always make the joke, Christians in 3084, Jesus is coming. Read the book of Revelations, because you're right, it does move through time. I love that. And people can repurpose it for their own, whatever they're trying to accomplish. Why do you think that some people actually put a date on the end? I've never understood that. If I were to be an apocalyptic prophet, I would be very vague, so I could get a lot of followers and a lot of money. I would never say it's going to be October 22nd, 2065. I would never put a date on it, but so many of them did. Do they just really believe what they have calculated? Because there's a lot of, to me, there's a lot of numerology involved in there where people are saying, I've added up this, like you said, the 69 weeks and then this. Do they really believe that they've been able to decipher it? And they're so confident in those dates that they actually give, hard and firm dates.
I think there are an awful lot of people who do think that they've cracked the code, but I think there are two intuitive impulses that are guiding this. One is attention, whether it's just attention, whether it's attention and money, whether it's attention, money, influence, sex, whatever. I think that's a very strong intuitive impulse. But there's also a degree to which I think it reflects this idea of costly signaling and credibility enhancing displays, where as a member of a tight-knit social group, there are certain behaviors that you do in order to signal to others that you're a faithful member of the group. And there are a bunch of different ways this works more broadly. Like, this is not remotely limited to ritual or religion. It is across all societies. But you have ways to signal to others that you may not know, I can be trusted. I'm a good, faithful member of this social identity. And the more costly it is, the stronger a signal it is that you are faithful. And so that can also turn into credibility enhancing displays, where you take the signal and then you ratchet up the cost to say to somebody else, ooh, I'm even more trustworthy. And the idea is you're showing them that you can be trusted even more than the average bear. And that's a way to enhance your credibility within the social identity. And so if somebody says, yeah, I think it could be soon, it's going to be September 24th, 19. Yeah. What you're doing is you're suddenly ratcheting up the cost. It's like, I'm willing to stake everything on this. And so for the folks who are believers in that community, it's kind of like, you did it. You said you effed the ineffable. Yeah, you went there. And that's a way to kind of increase the cost, because if you're wrong, you're going to have egg on your face. But with smaller social groups, you have what were they called? Heaven's Gate.
Yes, the Heaven's Gate cult.
You had very small groups where they are wholly committed to this, and there's not really there wasn't a way out for that. There was no, as far as anybody knew, it all worked because they went out before anything could.
But that's real faith there.
Well, hey,
you're all in, as opposed to, no man really knows the hour or the time, so we don't really have to tell you when it's going to be.
Yeah, at least according to the Bible, that would be the faith of a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to be like, throw us in the fire. Yeah. Unfortunately, put the Nikes on our feet and put us in the bunk beds, and unfortunately, tragically, a bunch of people ended their own lives, and so that's the highest cost you can signal. But so I think that's part of why some people want to put a date on it, because that ratchets up the cost, but it also ratchets up the credibility if you say that. And bizarrely, there have been people who have had like a bunch of chances. They've been like, it's this date, and then it comes back and it's like, I miscalculated. It's actually next week. And then people are like, all right, let's do it again. And then they've had 3 or 4 chances. And I think Bart even talks a little bit about some of those folks who have gone,
you just have to have
through
hope,
a few iterations.
You have to have hope, or maybe you weren't faithful enough. You can always put it back on the follower. But who wants to invest in all this and then it didn't happen? You need another way that you can kind of pin your hope on it like that. And it makes me so curious. Like I said, I just noticed recently conference talks, things like that in the LDS church, just more of a focus on it might be sooner than you think. And I just wonder, the scripture, no man knows the hour. Why are they doing this? Is it like what Landon mentioned? Maybe when they fear a little bit losing control of membership or people exiting, is that a strategy to say, you don't want to leave now, the movie's almost over, you better not? I mean, I guess it is a viable strategy. And has that been used before with these apocalyptic prophecies? Probably. Don't step out now.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it functions as a means of more clearly identifying boundaries. So there are, like the example of the name Mormon, that's an example of costly signaling, because now you've given people a tool. you've said you now have the permission to judge people and their fidelity to the church based on whether or not they use the word Mormon. And so now people are like, I'm the epithet police. I'm going to go around flashing my badge saying, you're not allowed to say Mormon. You're not faithful enough.
Yeah.
You're not signaling in a costly enough manner. So if to say that, the time is probably shorter than you think is a way to kind of ratchet up the stakes so the boundaries become a little sharper, so the folks who are maybe just a little bit on the outside might hopefully feel incentivized to get on the inside. So there's an awful lot of that is about boundary maintenance, about being able to tell who's in and who's out, and giving the members the tools and the permission to engage in their own boundary maintenance. Within the cognitive science of religion, there's this idea that deity concepts have persevered for so long throughout human history, in part because they are such effective entities for doing things that people on their own can't do. One is covertly monitor. Like, we can do that, but it's costly and you frequently get caught. But an unseen agent who can be anywhere and see everything is a very efficient covert monitor. And they can also punish, and they can, also have all knowledge. But if you don't have, if your appeals to God as a covert monitor only goes so far, if you turn everybody into, if you deputize the whole membership to be monitors of the boundaries, then you're kind of filling in the gaps in what the unseen agent is able to do. So there are, and all of this is happening on the intuitive level. People are not consciously, most of the time, they're not consciously thinking, I'm going to do this for this reason. But those intuitively, we kind of get nudged in the direction of doing it this way. Because that serves that intuitive impulse to generate boundaries and police boundaries, and so it's identity politics all the way down when it comes to institutional religions, so frequently. And the rhetorical value of something like the end of the world has no ceiling when it comes to deploying it for those purposes.
Well, it wasn't Daniel. You talked about Daniel earlier, and my understanding, this has been a while since I've read this, so I could be wrong. So I've got you here to correct me. But I thought that Daniel was correct all the way up to a point, and then he gets it very wrong, as you said. But my understanding was that that the enemy king and the enemy army was coming to take Jerusalem, or to take this kingdom. And all of a sudden this book shows up that says, he's gonna, our king's gonna destroy him, and we're gonna be victorious. And so it was really a way to keep the people loyal to the king, because, hey, we have a prophecy saying that we're going to be victorious in the end. And in the end, the king died, but he wasn't killed. He I think he got sick or something and died after they left, but he wasn't killed by the king. But really, that was like a tool to keep the people dedicated to the king through their belief that this prophecy is saying that, and isn't Revelation similar to that? Christ is going to come back, and we're all going to be okay. Stay on this team because we're the winning team.
Right. And that's a big part of it, is identifying the good guys and the bad guys. And it's a zero-sum game. You're either fully on the good side or you're fully on the bad side. And we see this even in the Dead Sea Scrolls. We see examples of this. There's a fragment of text that has become known as the Son of God text, because there's a part of it where somebody claims to be the Son of God, but it's unclear if this is a villain or a hero, because it is about this kind of apocalyptic battle that's going to settle all the scores, but it's not clear whose side the Son of God figure is fighting for. So that's a very old technique, and the only difference is during the first century CE, the Christians had no political power, so they had no king to rally around, no ruler to rally around, certainly no general or military champion to rally around. So it just had to be the lamb slain from the foundation of the world that they were rallying around, which raises such a fascinating point about the book of Revelation. So many people want to leverage it for the purposes of Christian nationalism and to structure political power. But one of the main points is that it was not political power that was victorious. It was the lamb slain who was killed, who was victorious through their sacrifice. And so one of the messages of the book of Revelation is that self-sacrifice is what makes you victorious over the empire that is obviously so much stronger than you militarily. And a lot of people just scorch right on by that message in order to get to the God drenching their sword in the blood of the victims.
And that was one of the big things on that Bart Ehrman brought up, was how different. Obviously, they didn't have a king to rally around, but the king. We do have a king, but he's gone, and he's going to come back and save us. So our king is gone. He's going to come fight the fight for us that we can't currently fight. But he points out the difference in how different this king was, Jesus on earth, who was all about love and compassion, and how different the king is that's coming back, because he didn't say forgive everyone. He's coming to destroy anyone who in any way opposes him or does not believe the way that he said to believe. And he's not just going to destroy you, he's going to destroy you in awful and mean and horrible ways.
Yeah.
It's not even the same Jesus that we're talking about in this case.
And this is one of the reasons that it was not a very popular text for a long time, because it's really difficult to reconcile the Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount, who's talking about how what the world expects is overturned. And, blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the meek, blessed is everyone that the world treats as less than. And then we get to the book of Revelation, where it's not about overturning empire, it's about trading places with the empire. So whereas in the Sermon on the Mount, it's like, no, those expectations all have to be overturned. It's not the strong, it's the weak. And in the book of Revelation, it's like they're stronger than us, but in the end, we're going to beat them and we're going to be the strong ones. And so it's actually just about trading places with the oppressor rather than overturning systems of oppression in the book of Revelation, which is why it was not a text that an awful lot of people liked. And there was an awful lot about excess as well. That for an ascetic early Christian community, followers of Jesus who expected you to fast, who preferred that you be celibate, who wanted you to live very modest lives without ostentatious displays of wealth and status and all that kind of stuff. It rubbed them the wrong way, because they were basically saying, we're going to come over the top of the empire and show and out empire the empire and then take their place, and we're going to be the ones sitting on the thrones. So it was unattractive in that regard as well.
But it seems like it is attractive now. I mean, I have friends and relatives that, they talk about the second coming, the end of times like that. And they talk about it in a way that they just seem to gloss over how everyone else will be destroyed, but they and their families will be okay. There's this sense that, people that are attracted to this, they know they will be okay. Do you think that's a reason why people are able to, just kind of promote this book, like this book, because they think they will be all right? And they don't really read it and recognize, I don't know, what are the odds that you'll be all right when like 99.9% of all the people are going to be destroyed in all these horrible ways?
And I think there are two kinds of people, because there are the folks who are like, oh, I'm going to be all right. And then there are an awful lot of Christians who are scared that they're not going to be. The folks who have the rapture anxiety, who are like, I don't know if I'm going to be good enough, who are terrified of that kind of stuff. But in order to show everybody else that you're one of the good ones, you have to signal to them that you're excited. Yay. And so I think there are an awful lot of Christians out there who are performing this excitement and performing approval of what's going on in the book of Revelation because they're probably scared, but they want others to think that they're excited about it, because that's a means of saying, oh yeah, I'm one of the ones
I'm good,
who knows that
I'm
we're
fine.
gonna make it. Yeah. And you hear about that kind of thing from people all the time, that they had tried to put on that face, and they tried to perform the being confident and being faithful and everything, but they were terrified the entire time. And so I think there's a whole spectrum of folks who talk about being excited about this kind of stuff, and I think there are some who really are, and there are some who are just horrified about it all. And it was never. I'm an adult convert to the church, so like end time stuff never meant anything to me, and it was never something that caused any kind of anxiety for me, because it always struck me as something authors were doing to try to motivate their audiences thousands of years ago, rather than something that God was trying to tell me today. It doesn't seem like this is something that is still in the post. It seems like this is something the letter was delivered and opened and decayed a long time ago.
So you're saying you're not like me. You weren't raised with 1,000 pounds of wheat in containers that your parents made furniture out of by throwing sheets over it, because we ran out of room to store it. Literally made a couch out of big containers of wheat. Yeah, that wasn't you. So no, my parents were very, when we finally moved them out of their house to a more assisted situation, there was so much food storage, in the basement. No good now, but boy, they were ready. Yeah. They were ready for the end, and they were going to be one of the ones that survived with all that wheat and rice and honey and generators. And, they don't really seem in the LDS church to amp that up so much anymore, the food storage, but I wonder if that's coming. I do wonder, they've done kind of studies on the verbiage in conference. They haven't mentioned food storage like they used to. That would make my parents buy all that wheat, right? I just am curious if that'll start coming back again, because it's definitely seems like a preparatory kind of, procedure for end times.
Well, I think there was something interesting that happened about 4.5 years ago, called COVID, where suddenly everybody who was saying, I got my all the food storage and I've got all the money saved, is suddenly like, how dare you keep me from Applebee's? And suddenly the food storage and all the saved money and everything didn't turn out to do much for them, because they threw conniptions about being asked to wear a mask so that you didn't kill grandma. I imagine that there's probably a moratorium on beating the prepper drum for a bit until we kind of get a little further away from that time when the world shut down and a bunch of people lost it, because how dare.
Well, it's hard to be a worldwide church where you're telling people in Japan who have a 1-bedroom apartment to save a year's worth of food, or to tell people in Africa where the church is growing, you need to save a year's supply, and they're going, I'm just trying to eat tomorrow. So I think that would be rather tone deaf to be preaching that to a worldwide church that they claim to be.
Yeah, I think there are a number of factors contributing to a desire to back off that rhetoric for a bit, and I think there are a bunch of messages, very similar messages, that there are probably folks who are like, not the right time for some of that messaging. But yeah, I do recall when the world shut down, it was like, now we're going to see if all the preppers were all that prepped.
Yeah.
And it turned out they could not handle it.
They couldn't handle it. Well, the mental side of it, it's hard to prepare for that for sure. So I think we have just a couple more questions. One that I thought was really interesting in Armageddon is the idea, Bart Ehrman said, even if you don't believe in the book of Revelations, which a lot of us don't, believe in it, you need to know what's in it, because whether you realize it or not, it is impacting political policy. It is impacting a lot in your life that you may not be aware of. He brought up the state of Israel. He brought up policies on climate change. A lot of these are informed by this idea that, well, it's all going to go this way anyway. And so what do you think of that idea of needing to be aware, because it really is baked in, to our political system and informs so many decisions that are made that you might not even really realize?
I think absolutely the more people are participating in public discourse on social media and elsewhere, they're going to run into that kind of stuff, and they're going to have to be able to respond to it. And there's one approach that is just dismisses it all as made up and mocks it all and all that kind of stuff. And that works for some folks. I think that just re-entrenches the folks who are on the end times side. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because they're like, see, the whole world is against us. But I think it is probably more constructive for folks to be aware of what's in there, so that they can be aware of where these things are coming from. They can be able to deconstruct these arguments that are being thrown at them, and hopefully be able to engage a little more directly. I would like to say that I'm a lot more patient than I really am about engaging with some of these folks, but I tend to take something a little closer to a kind of no nonsense approach, not just flippantly dismissing stuff, but pointing out where there are dogmas propping these things up rather than data. But I think it can only help people's engagement with the public discourse to know what's being said here, so that they can see where it's being manipulated, where it's being misrepresented. And hopefully that helps people better understand where others are coming from. Because I think greater understanding will go further towards diffusing a lot of this, and hopefully improving relationships with loved ones who might be in those camps, than just refusing to understand anything about it at all. One of the biggest criticisms I have of a lot of anti-religious folks and atheists is just dismissing it all as meaningless, dismissing it all as Bronze Age goat herder fantasies. Even there are even folks who are like, why would you get a degree in that? That's like getting a degree in Harry Potter. And it's like, that would be true if Harry Potter were this there. And I'm sure there are folks who will have those degrees before too long, but the Bible is the single most influential text that has ever existed, and it continues to be appealed to by folks who are at the levers of geopolitical power. And so to just dismiss it is to ignore such a critical factor in what's going on, and to divest yourself of the ability to engage that discourse. And I don't think that's helpful at all. I think it's important to understand what's in the Bible. I think it's important to understand how it came together, how it's been read the way it has been read, why it's been read the way has been read, why people are reading it the way they do today, and why they're saying the things about it that they are today. And so I think that's would be more productive and get us closer to answers and resolutions than just flippantly dismissing and rejecting everything, because there are real people on the other side of this. As much as they may be entrenched in dogmatism, and they may be suppressing critical thinking, and they may be using an awful lot of hate, there are real people on the other side of this, and people who have a lot to offer. But yeah, it's a difficult issue, because people have been getting so deeply entrenched for so long.
Yeah, it's almost as if it is very damaging to, like, the Middle East peace process. Israel was created because the Western nations all said, "Oh, there's got to be an Israel for the second coming. We've got to have a Zion. We got to create a Zion." Almost like God needs help to fulfill this prophecy, so we're going to create Israel. And now it's our responsibility to keep Israel strong, because Israel must prevail against the nations around it. And so you see all the Western nations pumping in. And if that revelations didn't exist, do you think the peace process in the Middle East would look different without these revelations that the end of times is coming and Israel must be there to bring it about?
Well, it would certainly be different, and I think the who's coming to the aid of these different geopolitical powers and why would certainly be different. The money that's going in and out and the support that's going in and out, I think would certainly be different, but I don't know how different, because a lot of what's going on over there is has been going on independent of Christian involvement for some time. But yeah, it's counterfactual history is a tricky thing. I would
Yeah.
hope that it would be significantly different, but I don't know how different. And yeah, the folks out there who every time Iran and Russia and Turkey get together, somebody is like, "Ooh, it's Ezekiel 38," and it's all
Yeah.
oh, geez, and it never is that.
And it never is that, but it may be soon. We don't know. So a lot of our audience are post-Mormon or nuanced Mormon. I haven't been to Sunday school for a really long time. Do either of you remember how the book of Revelations is really treated in any of the LDS curriculum? Landon, you used to be a gospel doctrine teacher. I don't remember. Do they just sort of wade in it very shallowly? Do they go? I mean, I can't
shallow.
remember. I was trying to think of that.
It's very shallow.
Yeah.
There's a lot more attention focused on the letters, and they just talk about how we can use this to better understand our own struggles with what we're doing wrong, what we need to be doing right, and then the symbolism of Revelation is usually used to try to emphasize how we all need to be prepared for the end times by having the Spirit and being righteous and following the prophet and all that. So it tends to be pretty shallow. There's not an awful lot, at least in my experience, there has not been an awful lot of overbearing end times warnings, but I have absolutely no doubt that there are gospel doctrine teachers all over who have waved that flag.
I do remember in seminary, and I think this was in Sunday school too, they always had this list of things that had to happen before the second coming would come.
Yes.
And it was out of Revelations, this is going to happen, and there's going to be wars, and there's going to be, and they just had this little checklist. So they're like, don't worry, it's not, these haven't happened yet. So we're not there yet. But when you start seeing these, the moon turns to blood or something like that. So that's what I remember from Revelations, was that this list of things that were supposed to occur.
And I always, another thing is for the last little while, my presence in the gospel doctrine class tends to have a kind of suppressing influence. There are not an awful lot of folks who want to stand up and start bloviating about the end times. I flatter myself that it's because people don't want to catch they don't want this smoke. But I have not chewed out too many people in Sunday school. I will not lie, it has happened, but it's been a while. So.
Well, like you said, that's your role. You need to keep everybody, on the straight and narrow when it comes to this. Well, now that you bring up that list, though, Landon, that was one of the saddest things that I noticed after General Conference, when there was an amping up of that rhetoric over on more faithful social media sites. I saw people, seem to be younger people, expressing, I'm really worried. I'm nervous. Do you think that I'll get married? Do you think I'll have time to have a family? And then older people chimed in and said, oh, there's this list. They were actually showing it that you don't need to worry. You can look at this, and if this hasn't happened, you're okay. But just the fact that they had to think that way and feel that anxiety, it was younger people, you could tell, that were feeling that anxiety. And it made me sad. It made me sad that was brought up in conference that way, and that people felt they had to do that.
Well, people should, I hope those young people won't read Paul, because Paul was saying, in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, a rule that I set down in all the congregations is stay in whatever circumstances you were in when God called you, because the time is short. And so don't make big life changes. If you're not married, don't get married. If you're married, don't get divorced. If you don't have kids, don't have kids. Like, it's all stay where you are, because it's literally time's running out, and it's going to be any day now. And to the degree that Paul didn't care about procreation, like Paul never says anything at all about anybody needing to have kids. Even his talks about sex are basically just, it's good for keeping down the urges. And so, I can't imagine what the kids in Paul's day were thinking when he was like, "Oh yeah, it's coming, it's coming,
It's here.
yeah, don't worry about high school because it's coming." And so, but even today, we've got young people who are worried about that, and how terrifying, what kind of a worldview is that within which to raise a family. I think that can only do damage to a young psyche.
Yeah. And they're making life decisions based on this idea. I mean, some of the posts I saw said, maybe I should stay home instead of, starting the semester because something might, and this is how it's always been. Don't plant your crops. He's coming. And then you starve when it's winter, don't go to school. It's just, it has real world consequences. Why I think it's important, which is why I think it's important to talk about and really dissect what it really is. So people maybe can lose that fear. Maybe put it in perspective. So maybe that's what we should kind of end on. It's just that idea of how do you put Revelations in perspective? You've talked a little bit about it, but just, to kind of help you just on a real world daily, because there are people that have these fears. It's just how the world is. So how does the book of Revelations help us, I guess, in that way and put it in perspective?
I don't think there's an awful lot that is particularly helpful in the book of Revelation for today, personally. I think that its inclusion in the canon has caused far more harm than good throughout history. But I would say that as a piece of apocalyptic literature from the late first century CE, it's fascinating. I think it reveals an awful lot about what this author was thinking about the in-group and the out-group, and how evil the Roman Empire was. And that caused a lot of issues in like the 4th century and the 5th century, when the Roman Empire became Christian, and suddenly they were like, and there were people saying, "Oh, it's been fulfilled. Now we're in the driver's seat." And so that was a common interpretation in the 4th and 5th century was, "Hey, we made it, and we're on the other side of everything now." And so for today, I would hope that people would just treat it like a piece of late first century CE apocalyptic literature that was just trying to exhort the followers of Jesus of their day toward greater faithfulness and to keep themselves unspotted from the evil Roman Empire, and realize it has absolutely nothing to do with our day. It is not a Ouija board about the 21st century. It is not going to help you make decisions about big life changes, and to relax a little bit about it. Frankie says relax, because this is 2,000-year-old literature, and it's not coming back.
I feel like maybe that will be the title of this episode, Landon. Forget the apocalypse. Relax, says Dan McClellan.
I did want to ask a question, because I don't think you can cover Revelations without talking numbers. There's so many numbers in there, the 7 hills, the 7 heads of the beast, which we know are the 7 hills of Rome. 666, the name of the number of the beast, which makes no sense to us Westerners, but it certainly would have made sense to people in that time, and the 144,000. What can you tell us about the numbers in Revelation?
They're mostly symbolic, and they're mostly drawing from imagery and numbers that we get from the Hebrew Bible. Like the 7 heads of the beast, there's a sense in which it's the 7 hills of Rome. There's also another sense in which it's a reference to the Leviathan, which is a 7-headed serpent and dragon. So people, they read Revelation and they read about this great red dragon and they think, that's Satan. Or well, it is Satan, but they think that's the serpent from the Garden of Eden. It's not. It has absolutely nothing to do with the serpent from the Garden of Eden, who was not identified as Satan until after the Bible was completed. It's the Leviathan. And we can go back to Ugaritic literature from around the 13th century BCE. And there's a story that almost word for word is quoted in Isaiah 27:1 about Leviathan, the wriggling serpent, Leviathan, the twisting serpent. And in Isaiah 27:1, it finishes off the dragon that lives in the sea. But the version from the Ugaritic literature is the dragon with 7 heads. And then in Psalm 76, 74, 76, I get those mixed up. One of those 2 Psalms, it talks about Adonai defeating or destroying the heads, plural, of Leviathan. And so that's harking back to imagery from the Hebrew Bible. The 144,000 is 12 times 12,000. So it's a nice round number related to each of the tribes of Israel. 666 is gematria, probably for Nero Caesar. If you take the name Nero Caesar from Greek, you transliterate it into Hebrew, it's Neron Kaiser. Transliterated into Hebrew, the numerical values of the letters add up to 666. If you take it from Latin and transliterate it into Hebrew, there's no N on the end. It's Nero Caesar. And the values add up to 616 or 616, which is the number that we find in Revelation 13:18 in one of our earliest manuscripts. Which comes from a part of Christendom that predominantly spoke Latin. So those are ways that they're encoding these references to particularly wicked emperors from the Roman Empire. And so a lot of it just has to do with, today, if somebody just posted on Twitter 42, there are an awful lot of people who would be like, ha, yeah. Yeah, I gotcha. And you can hide a lot of information for the initiated in a handful of numbers, and so they serve symbolic purposes, and it was even more true anciently. But mostly it's harking back to Hebrew Bible stuff and numbers and things like that, or it's trying to encode stuff that's going on in late first century CE Rome.
But in the name, like the name Nero Caesar, that really wouldn't have been that hidden. Everyone knew that when you spelled Caesar, because their letters also had a numeric value. Therefore, when you wrote out Caesar, everyone would know that also made this number 666, right? It wasn't really that hidden or secret. It's not like they were hiding it from anybody.
There's been an awful lot of debate about whether or not about what it is a reference to, and so it wasn't a particularly well hidden secret, but they still had some plausible deniability, and so I think that it was a way to just kind of hide it, put it in between the lines as oh shoot, it wasn't Donovan who said that. Who was it? I can't remember who sings that song. If I really want to say it, I have to put it in between the lines.
Yeah.
What's that? It's not important, but
that's right. They'll tell us in the chat when we air this. They'll go, you guys are idiots. It's so and so.
But my the oldie station here in Utah is just not cutting it. So I think there's some plausible deniability there, while it's also close enough to the surface for the folks who are initiated to be like, oh, I see who you're talking about. But because there's some plausible deniability, it also becomes something that you can say, oh, this is about COVID. Oh, this is about Barack Obama. Oh, this is about the United Nations. Oh, this is about the Euphrates River drying up. Oh, this is about this, and this is about that, and this is about the other. And that kind of allows it to keep on reincarnating for every generation.
Yeah, it's got something for everyone. I think that's what we're trying to say.
It's a choose your own adventure.
You can choose your own adventure. Oh, I have just loved this conversation, and we really could go on all night. I know that, but we're not going to. I feel like Landon, we kind of went, what about? And Dan's like, nope. But what if? Nope. But what? Nope. But when? Nope. I mean, he just cut it all down and explained the truth. So I just think that's great. It's wonderful. So this has been really, really good. As we end, Dan, do you have anything that you want to tell us about what you're doing next? Anything that's coming out besides the book? Make sure you tell everybody where they can find you on what platforms. I mean, I'm sure they already know, but for anybody who's under a rock that doesn't know, Why don't you just quickly go through some of that so we can make sure everybody can have more Dan?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you. I go by @McClellan, MAKLELAN. That's actually the phonetic spelling of my last name I used while I was a missionary in Uruguay, because names that begin with 4 consonants in a row are not easy for a lot of folks to pronounce. So I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on YouTube and Twitter, and also Blue Sky and Threads. And so I'm around. And then we have the Data Over Dogma podcast, which releases new episodes every Monday. We're going to have an interview with, do I have the book? Oh no,
hold the books up. That's important.
Rev Carla Kamstra wrote a book called Deconstructing. And so we have an interview with her about her book coming out next Monday. So that'll be a wonderful episode. I don't know when this airs, so it might not be next Monday.
It'll be soon. Yeah, it could be after. You guys will know how to find it. And we'll put some links in the show notes as far as, everything that Dan has said, so we can make sure we can access all of that. So, well, this has just been great. Thank you so much for coming on. This has just been our wildest dreams come true and answered all our questions about the apocalypse. I'm less terrified now than I was. Don't you feel that way, Landon?
Yeah. I think we should air it just before Jesus comes. So when you see this aired.
And when are you trying to make a prediction, Landon?
That's right. It's very close.
Church and say that, are you going to, like Dan said, double down with that credibility and actually say a time and day? Are you going to do that?
I think we should stay away from that. Yeah.
I think so too. Yeah. We don't want that any of that on Mormonish. So, well, this has just been wonderful. So please, everybody comment, let us know, what do you think about the apocalypse? Or are you aware of people that just take this so seriously and it has a day-to-day impact in their lives? I mean, I do have friends and relatives that are like that. I think a lot of us, that base decisions on this. Please comment and let us know if that's something that you're aware of, or maybe that's you. I don't know. So please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell. You can always make a donation to help support Mormonish Podcast. We have links in the show notes to donor box, and we are a 501(c)(3), so that makes it easy. We also have links in the show notes to our Mormonish merch. You can get a mug or a hat or something fun like that that'll keep you warm during the apocalypse. So a nice Mormonish sweatshirt. That's what you want to wear. So
have a cup of cocoa while the world
burns. That's right.
Cup
of Mormonish cocoa and a cozy sweatshirt, and you'll just be watching the apocalypse from your deck, right? That's what we want to do. So anyway, and again, thank you so much to Dan for coming on. It was just wonderful, so delightful to talk to you. And thank you, everybody, for watching and for listening. And we'll see you all next time on Mormonish Podcast. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.